equipping you to navigate your grief journey after child loss. This is the Hope After Child Loss podcast. On each episode, we explore the many challenges of grief as guests share their stories of loss. It's also a place where you will hear about God showing up in our darkest moments and restoring meaning, purpose, and hope to shattered lives. Welcome to another episode of the Hope After Child Loss podcast. I'm Greg Buffkin, and I'm glad you could join us. On today's episode, I'll be talking with Leslie Burman, Willow's mom and co-founder of Be Like the Willow, a nonprofit to honor Willow by striving to provide comfort through acts of kindness, resources to aid grief, and support like-minded charitable organizations. And now here's my conversation with Leslie. Well, Leslie, welcome to our podcast. It's so good to have you with us today. And also, I want to welcome your mom to the podcast because even though she's out of sight, she is listening intently as any mom would.
Always. She's my right-hand lady.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you so much for having me. This is a very humbling opportunity. I appreciate your time.
Well, it's a privilege, and I'm honored to have you as a guest. So, Leslie, why don't you take a couple of minutes and just tell us a little bit about yourself, anything you'd like to share about your family or anything else that's going on that you want the listeners to hear.
My name is Leslie Burman, and I am Willow's mom, and my story kind of starts in the middle of my life. I was raised a strong woman with a deep faith, but I don't know that I necessarily got kind of rooted into my faith until I went through my experience with my first pregnancy. I was 40 weeks, 2 days, and we had a very normal pregnancy. We didn't have to watch for anything. All the doctor's appointments were fine. Everything was good. I went on Tuesday for my last tummy check appointment, and they said, if you don't naturally go into labor, we're going to induce you on Saturday. I went the very next day to triage because I had never been pregnant before. I didn't know what to expect.
Right.
And I didn't know if I was in labor or not. So we drove to the triage, and I think I was experiencing Braxton Hicks. And so they said, everything looks good. They had hooked me up. The heartbeat was very loud. They kept turning that monitor down, and they said, come back when, XYZ, and that will mean that you're in labor. And so I went home. Well, actually, we grabbed a bite to eat. It's probably the only thing that I can't do now is that of all of my experiences, I cannot eat at that restaurant ever.
I completely understand that. And that's been how long?
So this was in 2017. So it will have been 8 years this coming June.
Yeah. And that's something that people on the outside don't really understand is those things that you just mentioned that might seem so trivial to somebody else. For us who've experienced the loss of a child, there are things that are associated with that day or with that season of life that we just can't do anymore.
Yeah, I'm like, I can't eat. No, we can eat anywhere else. I'm cool to talk to you about whatever, to anybody, but that I can't eat there. But yeah, we left from triage. We grabbed a bite to eat. It was kind of late. Went home, fell asleep, and woke up the next morning. I felt super energized. I'd only woke up maybe twice throughout the night, which normally it was every hour. And I went to work and we have a photography studio, and I was doing frame inventory. Like everything was normal. I felt awesome. And I noticed about midway through my morning that my stomach was contracting, but I hadn't felt any of those big kicks. Normally when I would wake up, there'd be a big kick. When I would eat, there would be a big kick. So I called my husband and just said, I'm not really sure. I feel great. And my body would be telling me if something was wrong. So I think everything's fine, but also I haven't really felt those big kicks. And he said, just call the nurse line and see what they say. So I called and they said, why don't you just come up to triage? Their first question actually was, well, what's your kick count? And I said, I don't know what that means. So
I've never heard of that.
So a kick count is how many times you have felt movement in, I believe, an hour. And I was like, I didn't know I was supposed to be keeping track of that. I guess if you're asking when the last time I felt a big kick like I normally have the whole rest of the pregnancy, I don't think I felt one since last night. And they said, why don't you just come up? Let's check you out. And I was like, yeah, but I was just there yesterday. And they said I wasn't in labor and it's no different now. And so I feel fine. And they were like, just come. So we went up, very similar routine, went to triage, got me all hooked up. And the nurse reached her hand down and was turning the button up, the volume button up. And there was nothing, which if you've done that before, baby might not be in the right position.
Right.
Need to try a couple different things, but she was moving all around. Nothing. And that's whenever my husband and I locked eyes and I was like, something's not right. But yet nobody was rushing around. I wasn't being, wheeled out for surgery. There wasn't this emergency situation. So kind of confused.
Yeah.
And so another person came in with an ultrasound machine and they couldn't really tell me exactly what was going on. But it was very apparent. And, then we fast forward, I chose to have a C-section. And I think I was so confused as to what had happened or what I did, or, there wasn't an apparent moment of when she passed. There was nothing to reflect on, even to know, well, if I would have done this, then we would be in a different situation. It was like, I was just here yesterday and everything was fine.
Yeah. And at this point, Leslie, they still had not told you anything definitive, right?
They had said, this is kind of a part in my story where there's a chunk missing.
Yeah.
Because I think I was so in shock that I didn't really take in. I don't remember ever hearing there is no heartbeat. It was, more of like they brought in this huge, the small ultrasound machine went out, the large ultrasound machine came in, and it was like, do you see right here? There's no activity. There's no flicker. This should be looking like this, and it doesn't. And the lady that came in and did that was so sweet. She said, do you want me to print, this as kind of like your last ultrasound? And so we do have that from the big ultrasound machine. And at that point, then it was confirmed, they wanted to be absolutely 100% sure. And then my doctor came in and I said, well, what's next? What happens next? Obviously, I still have to deliver. I don't know. I don't understand what's going on. And he explained, you can wait and you can do naturally, or we can induce you. You can go home. And I'm like, that's not an option for me. I'm not going home, which there are a lot of women that do. They go home and wait till their body goes naturally into labor. And I praise them because I can't even fathom doing that. They are very, very strong women. But I said, he said, you're in no rush. We don't have to make the decision right at this moment. Think about it. If you have any questions, we can answer any questions. And so my husband and I talked about it, and I was like, I don't really know. I feel like he came back in and I said, so there is always the option that if I do deliver naturally, that it could still end in a C-section, right? And he said, yes, in some cases, yes, that's always an option. And so we kind of decided, because of the circumstance, that it would be better emotionally for me. And honestly, if the circumstances were the same, and I had to do it all over again, I would choose a C-section. Even with having 2 more babies and having to have a C-section for them, I would pick a C-section because it was one of the most peaceful and loving and compassionate experiences of my life. And I think a lot of that is because I was able to sit in that moment for as long as I needed and know when I was going back for surgery and know at least like there was no control over the situation, but that part I had control over.
Yeah.
I could choose that. I knew when it was going to happen. I knew kind of what the process was, and it just allowed that part of my mind to be at ease. And the
Well,
nurses and the hospital staff and everything, they were so, so nice. They were so kind. So
well, that's a blessing that you had that level of peace. But I mean, I can only imagine that there was such a flood of emotions at that point. Disbelief and shock, and probably a dozen other emotions that were all just kind of cascading at the same time.
yeah, I feel like because there was no urgency of all the things that needed done, that stress wasn't there, that I can remember my mom, which I didn't tell anybody for a very long time, this part, but my mom came up to the triage and there was only one person allowed in the room. So my husband stepped out, my mom came in, and she said, everything will be okay, with this terrified look on her face. Like, how could this have happened? But out loud, she says, just like any mom, she says, everything is going to be okay. And I looked at her and I said, I know, I don't really have control over this. And I said, and I think I needed to experience it so I could advocate for it. And it was so crystal clear in my head that was the only reason. That was the only reason why it could have happened. Later to find out that we did the testing, we did the autopsy, we did blood work, we did all of that. And everything came back, quote, normal. And it's like, there's really something very large that's not normal about this situation, but
Yeah.
we have no medical reason as to why it happened. And so I think in a sense that God was just like, this is your why. Your why is to walk this so that way others can learn from you and you can, bless others with sharing your experience and talking about it and having a greater understanding for even just people that haven't experienced pregnancy and infant loss, but just a general gratitude for people around you and the weight that they're carrying in any instance of their life.
What an amazing perspective from someone so young. It just speaks volumes about your faith, and it speaks volumes about God's grace and his love, that he met you right there at that particular time when you needed his peace. And it sounds as though he just absolutely flooded your heart and mind with that.
Yeah. And I think too, faith is a big part of my life. And with the Be Like the Willow movement and everything that we'll talk about in a bit. But with that, I try not to bring that into it a lot just because that's not everybody's experience. And I totally understand that. But for me, it was an extreme comfort that Willow, was nestled in my stomach and warm. And, there wasn't an apparent moment for me that I felt like she was in pain or suffering or whatever, and how calming and reassuring as a mother that she never opened her eyes, but when she did open her eyes, the first thing she saw was God. Like how I could never give that to her as her mom, earthside, as some people say. I could never provide that for her. And so, warm and cozy to warm and open arms.
Absolutely.
Like I'm like, so I know that's not for everybody, but
don't you wish it was?
Yeah. So I find great comfort in hoping that that's, and it, in knowing that was part of our part of her story.
Yeah, what an amazing story that is. And I appreciate you so much for sharing that with authenticity and just giving us a glimpse into what that was like, and in a moment that every parent fears. So thank you for that. Something I wanted us to talk about too, Leslie, is you lost Willow in a way that I think it happens a lot, but we don't hear about it quite as much as a child who dies later in life for whether it's an accident or suicide or whatever the reason might be. And I think because of that, and I want to hear your thoughts on this, I think sometimes in our culture, we underestimate badly, I think, the impact that the death of a child being stillborn or through miscarriage has on the parents. What are your thoughts on that as you've observed this, from a firsthand perspective? And I'm certain you've talked with other moms and or dads who've experienced something similar.
I think it's different for everyone, but I think the thing that surprised me and kind of took my breath away, if we're talking specific moments, was shortly after we were in the hospital. I was all healed from my C-section, and we went to a birthday party. And I didn't realize that I would totally break down at singing happy birthday. That was not in my oh, I'm going to a birthday party and that's hard. I didn't realize I was in it until I was in it or something. So, you go to events and you go to things that should be this very joyous occasion. And with every little bit of joy, there's always a little bit of sorrow. And I hadn't prepared myself for that. Even now, almost, 8 years later, I'm still, every time, I can hardly make it through a happy birthday. I have to stop halfway through and just take a breath. And there are certain moments where it just kind of throws you back into that.
Right.
And so it's strange because when you lose someone and they're older, you have all of these memories that back that person and who they were and, their integrity and all of the things that you absolutely loved about them. And you could close your eyes and you can just picture all of those wonderful things about those people. But when you lose a baby, you don't have any of that. You have all of the what ifs and where would they be now and what would I be doing, and even future children. If you have future children, would I, what I have ever planned to have been pregnant 3 times? Never. I was always in my head, I was going to have 2 babies and I was going to be done. But in my instance, I have Willow and I have Ruby and I have Oscar. And it sets you up to just view things so differently. I mean, even getting pregnant again and all of the emotions that come with that. It's how do you put your mind at ease when nothing was wrong before?
Right.
And I think a lot of stillbirths, they don't have a reason, they don't have a preventative reason of something that you could have done that was so apparent whenever it did happen that now you can not do that the next time. So you're just wishing and hoping and praying that nothing is going to go wrong. And that's a lot to carry. And that isn't only a lot to carry for you, but for your family, for your partner, everybody is affected by it.
Yeah, and let's talk a little bit about that, because there's probably a mom listening today who might be in that very place where she's lost a baby, whether it's stillbirth or maybe it survived for a few hours or days, and she still wants to have more children, or at least she thought she did, and now she's questioning that because she's so afraid that it might happen again. How did you and your husband navigate that?
We chose to we chose to try again very quickly. And I think that was what was best for us. I had a very unwavering, like very rocky transition between being in the hospital and being back to normal. It was as if nothing had happened. I had my C-section. I was healed pretty much from surgery 6-8 weeks later. I was back to working long hours. It was just me and my husband at home. It just was like normal life, and then you have a pregnancy, and then normal life again. I didn't have any new routine. It just made it feel like, was that a dream? Did that happen? And so I think I needed the distraction, I guess, to feel like, and probably deeper, to feel like I could do it. Like the failure, which is awful, but the failure part of it that you feel, where it's like, how could I have grown this child, and how could I have let them down? How could I not have done it right and achieved that, And I think everybody feels a little bit of that.
But that's false guilt.
I do. But you still think it. I mean, there's a lot of things you shouldn't think that you do think.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And part of that is normal. And I think for so long, people didn't talk about loss and miscarriages and stillbirth because it didn't feel like what they thought was the correct thing to think.
Yeah.
A lot of that used to be taboo, but I think more of it is like what I just said. I thought this, and I don't think people want to say that out loud, but it's something that they think, and so it makes it for a hard conversation because you're so vulnerable. But I think for me, I just had to, I would worry all day. And when I had really bad days, I would go in and sit in the rocking chair in the nursery, and I would cry. And then I would calm down. Like, I let myself live in that grief. And I would stand up, and every night before I went to bed, I walked into my room, put my hand on the door frame, and I gave it to God. I'm not taking this worry to bed with me, whatever. And I think part of that too is I lost her, I think, overnight, so
yeah,
going to bed was hard. It was like, I can't control what is happening while I'm sleeping. I'm just releasing this. Whatever happens. And so that was kind of what got me through both of my pregnancies. And, you'd think if you had the second baby, that the third baby would be fine. You wouldn't have that worry and that stress, but you do. It's with every child that you carry. There's always something that is bigger than you that you can't control, that just there's just a possibility of it happening. And that's very scary.
Yeah, I think one of the things that when something like this happens, that we really come face to face with, and I can speak personally to that, is you realize, you really, really, for maybe the first time, realize that the control that you thought that you had, you don't. And when you come face to face with that, you realize that probably for most people, what they feared the absolute most as a parent is to lose a child. And you come face to face with that reality. And I love what you said a couple of minutes ago, that when you experience that pain and you experience those very sad emotions, and you just sat in that rocker and you allowed that to wash over you, and yes, it made you cry, but that's normal. That's, if we don't lean into that initially, early on, then at some point later in the grief journey, things like that are going to come out, and they'll sometimes manifest themselves in ways that aren't particularly good or healthy. And I believe that when if that happens, it's much more difficult to deal with at that point.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're listening today, take heed to what Leslie shared. Lean into it. I mean, it's a process that we all have to go through, but hopefully you don't have to go through it alone. And that's another thing I want us to touch on is the support that you guys got. What did that look like, Leslie?
Well, naturally, nobody knew what to say. Anytime there's a death, everyone gets a little bit awkward because you don't want to offend anybody. You want to make sure you say just the right thing. And sometimes that results in just silence.
Right.
People just don't talk because they're nervous. But I think for me that our community, we have a very small community, but we have a very strong and wonderfully made community that just is an outpouring of what can we do? How can we help? And those were the two phrases I think I heard the most. What can we do? How can we help? I think that it looked a little different than I ever would have anticipated. You know, people do meal trains and they bring you food and they do donations and they do all of that. But it's the people who have kind of walked a similar path. You know, they send these very meaningful gifts. I got one delivered to work probably 2 months after. So the big reaction of what had happened had kind of faded away a little bit. And I'm just, normal routine again. And I got this package in the mail and I was here by myself at work and I opened it, not expecting to see this little, it was like a little ornament that was handmade. And another mom who had experienced a loss not that long before us had purchased this. And the person that made it included like a little story, like a little flip book of all of her losses and her experience. And it was just this snowball effect of this experience that I'm not the only one. And this person was not, I wouldn't consider, we weren't friends. We were acquaintances. We knew each other through other people. And how kind to send me something because you can relate kind of with what I'm going through. And I broke down. And it's like, I think the pay it forward attitude of, at one point I said, I'd really like to donate 10 elephants to forget-me-not baskets. And would anybody be willing to pour into that? And 110 elephants later, the first year, it's like people are so willing to give. And I think a lot of times they just don't have the tools in their toolbox that they realize at least to do it. And so it almost gives them permission to say, what can I do? How can I help? And that was the support that we received. It was like the selfless acts of giving to organizations and raising money, for cuddle cots, that just kind of surrounded me with that love. I can't even, from people that aren't family, that aren't, friends, that just know me, that, maybe I graduated with them. Maybe they graduated with my parents. It's just, they were like, how can we help in any way? What can we do?
I love that. What you shared about this individual who sent you that package 2 months later. I think that's so important because, when it first happens, people are, there's an outpouring of food and cards and sometimes texts or phone calls. Gosh, I don't know, after a couple of weeks or so, I think particularly you could say after the funeral.
Yeah.
People go back to their normal daily routines and their focus is on what's going on in their own lives at work and at school and the list goes on and on and on. But for us, for you guys, it probably in some respects felt like your world had come to a screeching halt. And that's when we really do need other people. And it doesn't have to be anything big or momentous like you were saying, But the fact that she remembered you and she didn't hesitate, even though it had been a couple of months, I can only imagine the impact that made on you. And, so, if you're listening and you have an opportunity to do something like that, but you're thinking, oh gosh, it's been 3 or 4 months, it's probably not going to matter that much now. Believe me, it matters far more than you can even begin to imagine, maybe even more so now than had you done that in the first week or two.
Yeah. And I think the topic is starting to get talked about more frequently now.
I agree.
Because so many people experience it. And so my hope is that because it's talked about more, that other people that haven't experienced it have a little bit more grace, that it's not just something that's hard right now. It's continuously hard. You wake up and you think about what that could have been, and then you go to bed at night, and if you're blessed to have more children, you tuck your kids in at night and you're like, but there's one that's not here.
Right.
And it's a very hard thing to swallow, that it's just a constant reminder. And so, yeah, I met somebody the other day, they had a loss 55 years ago. And it's like, she said, I never talked about my son until these past couple of years, when other people have been talking about it, and I was able to freely, and I'm like, I cannot imagine carrying that for that long and just not having anybody that you felt comfortable to talk to. And that's a person that needs a gift like right now. That's a person that needs a blanket or something.
Yeah.
That you're thinking of them, because I think people get so caught up in the negativity, and they want to be on someone's side so bad. And so, if they say a bunch of negative things because that person's saying a bunch of negative things, then they feel like they're a part of that. But in reality, that same thing can happen with positive things.
Sure.
You can see other people doing kind things, and you can also be kind. You can let that be contagious and let that have a ripple effect. And people like to feel nice about themselves. People like to feel thought of. People like to feel heard. And so wouldn't you rather be the person that is supportive and thought of as to be a giving person, somebody that you could call and just say that, listen, I'm having a bad day and I don't need you to fix all my problems, but I just need you to listen.
Yeah.
Would you rather be that person for somebody than the opposite?
Absolutely. We all need encouragement.
Yeah.
And sometimes
and to feel valid. I mean,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. What I'm gathering is that you really have the gift for that, but it's because of what you've been through, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Maybe in other respects as well. Leslie, how would you say that having and losing Willow has changed you as an individual? Because I from speaking from experience, I know that it does.
Yeah, I think that I try to keep things in perspective. I try to see a bigger picture. And personally, that would be my answer for others. I try to really, if somebody is talking to me and expressing their emotions in a way that is not very nice, I try to just be like, maybe you're having a bad day, maybe you've got things going on, and that's okay. But personally, I think I give myself a little more grace than, I can only be so many things to so many people. And
you can't be everything to everybody.
No. And
well, you discovered that at a young age. Congratulations.
Really hard, but I can only accomplish so many things in a day, and I can only do my best. And so where before I think I would get very anxious and worried and, about all of the people. And I still have many days that I'm like, I'm letting everyone down in my life, but, um, but I think I give myself a little bit more grace because everything that I have right now is nothing compared to what I was walking, 7, 8 years ago. There's just nothing. There's nothing as large that I am carrying right now as 7 to 8 years ago. So that's been a huge lesson for myself. I think I have a little bit more patience. I think I have the ability to say, you know what, this just isn't as big as everybody thinks that it is. And
Yeah,
I'll get to it. It's like,
it does change perspective, does it not?
yes.
You discover sometimes you don't ever say anything about it, but again, conversations with others, and there's something that is just weighing so heavily on them and just consuming them. And from your perspective, it's so small
Yeah.
in the realm of things
Yeah.
because of what we've experienced. But, it's all relative. So, they can't have our perspective. And truth be told, we wouldn't want them to.
Right.
But it speaks to what you were saying, that it absolutely does change how we see life in so many different ways.
And even just when you're out, just taking a moment, like just being able to feel comfortable in saying, I just need a couple minutes. I just need to be right here for just a couple minutes. Whether it's to reflect, whether it's to give yourself a break or just pause. Like I just need a couple minutes.
Yeah.
And I think you prioritize your mental health and your feelings and everything a little bit different because that change in perspective. And I really do believe that the people that are closest to you have a great understanding for that. They say, okay, let's go. Let's go take you where you want to go. What do you want to do? And Willow's birthday, which even just now I broke a little bit, like it's not really a birthday. I mean, it's the day that she was born, but she never, there's so many still.
Yeah.
But the day that she was born, we go and we do stuff at the cemetery. We do dilly bars and all of that. And I can remember, I think it was a couple days, I don't remember. Well, I don't remember. It was a couple days before or earlier in the day. I went through the cemetery and one of my really good friends was there working on her grandma's grave who had just passed away. And I went through and I think it was that night. So it was after we did all the dilly bars and everything. And I had just gotten home. I got my other two kids to bed and I lost it. Sitting and laying and tucking in my living children is one of the hardest things for me to do. And I was like, oh my gosh, I should have a 7-year-old laying in bed with me. And
yeah,
God bless the 6-year-old, but also, and so it just all comes back, and so I'm in my pajamas by no means able to see any normal person. Like and I go in my car and I go over because I go through the cemetery every day and drive past her stone. And one of my best friends was there and I'm like, if for some reason it was a very hot spot to be that day, there had to have been 20 cars. There was never anybody there.
Oh,
but
wow.
and I was like, I need to get out of here. I'm sobbing. I'm in my pajamas. My hair's on top of my head, and I drove past and kind of sped up and she's running, waving her hands. And I got out of the car and I said, you're going to regret this, because she gave me a big hug and I said, and she said, I know. She said, it's just not supposed to be like this. And I said, yeah. I was like, I have to get back in my car. There's too many people. I have to go. But, people like that just realize that they just give you grace. They give you time.
Yeah. What a sweet, special friend.
Yes, I agree.
Those are the ambushes that happen when we don't see them coming, whether it's a visit to the cemetery or the birthday or just something associated with your child, and it just hits you from out of nowhere, and it just renders you into a puddle.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
even the physical, like the physical weight, and I don't think unless you've lost someone, a child, I mean, a parent, whoever, I don't think that weight with just this, like, my body hurts, my muscles ache. I can't think straight. I can't, I'm not in the right frame of mind to do whatever I was planning to do today. I just need to.
Yeah. And what a lot of people don't understand is that, it's not something that you get over eventually. It's grief is a grief journey is lifelong. There is no expiration date on it. And so we learn how to do life with it.
Mhm.
But there is a big part, probably a bigger part that people don't see of that grief journey. And that's one of the things that you just pointed out, Leslie, and that is the physical impact that it has on a parent, that manifests in a number of ways. And there's the mental impact. People, we know about the COVID brain fog and sometimes the fog of depression, but there's also the fog that comes with grief. And that comes and goes as well. Sometimes it surprises us. And that's why I think sometimes people who are grieving think they're going crazy because they know they're not themselves, but they can't really figure out what's going on. So it's, it just is a reminder to be very patient with moms and dads that are going through something like this, and to just offer grace. And sometimes all you need to offer is your presence. There's no magic words that you can use. Just offer your presence. Let them know that you care and that you love them and you're there for them. Before we go, I want to give you an opportunity to tell us about Be Like the Willow.
That actually was Be Like the Willow was created shortly after we lost Willow. I was in the hospital bed, and we were trying to figure out a graceful way to put into words as to what had happened and post that on social media. We had a lot of family and friends, again, small community. And everybody knew. I mean, I don't know how many text messages my family members got that was like, "Baby yet? What's going on? Like, give us an update." And so I said, I know how people are, and I just think we need one singular post that people can write what they want to write, and there's no questions. And so as I'm writing this and, adding this beautiful picture that was taken of us with her in the recovery room, and I'm like, there has to be a willow tree quote. I mean, there has to be. So I Googled it. And the very first thing that came up was a quote that said, "Be like the willow tree, able to bend without breaking under the weight of the storms that come your way." And I was like, that's where I'm at. That's where I'm like, this could totally break me, or I could choose to bend and adapt and have understanding and have grace for myself. And that's perfect. So that went into the Facebook post. That was in June. And then I had a C-section. I healed from that. In September, I was sitting at work and I was eating my lunch and I was scrolling on social media, and there was like 3 posts right in a row, all complaining about very, like you said, big things in people's lives that were just not big things in my life.
Right.
I had to wait in the grocery line and it was so long, and can you believe they didn't open another lane? And gas prices are through the roof. How are we ever going to afford gas? Like it just was, I want to, the snarky part of me, which a lot of people don't see, but the snarky part of me wanted to say, my baby died, and just leave that there, like just, but I'm like, that's not, we're not doing that. But it kind of got to that point where I was like, I just don't need this in my life. I don't need this part of the negativity influencing my thoughts. And I'm just going to get off of social media. And then I thought, I'm not going to do that immediately. Anytime I have those kinds of thoughts, I'm like, nope, this is not going to take control like that. I'm I'm going to make it a point to stay on social media. And out loud, I said to my mom, wouldn't it be nice if we could just maybe give suggestions of nice things that people could pick from a list of just nice things, and then they could post those things? And we both kind of laughed and went about our day. And then I started to think about it. And as I mentioned before, I think a lot of people have really good intentions. Everybody has a really good heart. They want to give. They want to be a part of something bigger. Their intentions, I like to think, are pure. It's just what happens after all of the intentions that sometimes, they get a little bit off track, and then now we're over here. But so I was like, what if let's print out a blank calendar in October and just fill it with acts of kindness. And so I put on social media, I have this idea. It could affect you directly, your inner circle, or it could expand out much bigger than you could even imagine who's in. And all of these people around me that have no idea how to help, and they want to help. How can I help? What can I do? I'm in. They typed, I'm in. And 350 comments later, I had all of these people that wanted to do whatever my idea was. And I was like, well, I better figure out an actual game plan. So I researched and noticed that October is Pregnancy and Infant Loss Awareness Month. And I said to my mom, I said, well, that's fitting. And so I started to place these acts of kindness on the different days. And I put special ones on there that I kind of, as a personal goal, wanted to give back to the people that gave so kindly to me. So, the hospital that I delivered at, I wanted people to make blankets and do that. I wanted people to give back to forget-me-not baskets and donate elephants. And we got an elephant in our box, and that was so nice to go home with that, because your arms are so empty.
Yeah.
You have something to hold, or just a gentle reminder to kind of walk by and see and smile, oh, well, there's Willow. And so different days on the calendar that were special to me. And then we started what's called a Green Heart Giver program, which is somebody who gives $25 or more, and that money is allocated to go strictly to a cuddle cot, which is a cooling device that helps to preserve the baby's features longer. So you have the gift of time, and you don't feel so rushed in the hospital, and you can do all the things that you don't know if you're supposed to do, like giving the baby a bath, reading the baby a book, dressing the baby, all of those things. It just helps to preserve their features. Sure. And so we started this Be Like the Willow movement, going back to that quote that fits so perfectly into just really everybody's life. Be like the willow tree, just be able to bend, and you got a lot of stuff coming at you, but just try to adapt and try to bend. And the first year I said, I have 350 mailers and I'm going to send them out. Now, I didn't ever want to be in charge of money. I didn't want to keep track of that. I just wanted to raise money for other organizations. So all of that was out of pocket. First year we sent them out, and I ran out. I had more than 350 people that messaged me. And so I had to send out digital packets.
Wow.
And so this year is the 8th year that we have done the movement. And about 2 years ago, I just kept getting these nudges, like right about the time I would have self-doubt and be like, nobody cares about this. This isn't, I really care about it, but as everybody's getting sick of this, and, all that doubt that just is in your head. And then I would get a message from somebody who lost a baby that's like, hey, I got a box at the hospital, and the elephant tag on its ear had your thing. I got on your website, blah, 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 blah. And it was wow. Like, okay, all right, okay, it's okay, it's important. And right around that time, as much as I kind of wanted to push everything away in all aspects, I just kept getting these nudges to circle back to it. And I'm like, I want to be the organization that not only helps other organizations, but I want to be long term a place where somebody can go and if they don't relate to my story, they have a story on my site of another mom or another organization or something that they can relate to, that they can help with their grieving process, or, when they're in the hospital, that they get an item that has the information on it. So that way, from the beginning, they are experiencing with the circumstance that they're in, that they are experiencing the best that they could, and start that grieving journey in a lighter place, and hopefully can make a difference that way. So about 2 years ago, I applied to be nonprofit status and we were approved. So now
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. Now we can reach even wider. And within those last 2 years, I've had the wonderful opportunity to be able to meet so many organizations in this lost community that are just doing amazing things. And the nice thing about technology is they're able to be used even if they're not from the state. They're organizations that meet virtually. And so I've met all of these wonderful people. And I was just telling my friends last weekend, I said, it's just such a different experience when you're in a room with other people who have experienced the same or similar to you. There's just a sense of, there's a release of expectations that somebody you've just met is put onto you. I'm now in the process of working with them and seeing how we can support each other. And hopefully I'm succeeding in having it be a helpful resource for new lost families and expanding their, giving them podcasts that they can listen to and connecting them with different things that can really help. So that's kind of what Be Like the Willow has 4 roots. Kindness is a huge thing. That's kind of how it all started. But now, kindness, charity, grief, and awareness, and everything that we do fits into one of those 4 roots of our willow tree. And I hope that it just continues to grow and that it continues to help people.
Oh, I'm sure it will. I mean, I love what you guys are doing, and I've been to your website, and those photos that you talked about a little earlier, those are absolutely so sweet and beautiful.
Thank you.
And I saw the calendar that you referred to.
Mm-hmm.
So for those of you who are listening, I would encourage you to check out Leslie's website, and it's www.belikethewillow.com, right?
Yep.
Yep. So do check that out. And Leslie, thank you so much for all that you're doing, for what your organization is doing, and thank you for how you're coordinating with other ministries, getting those cuddle cots out. You've been very humble about the number of cuddle cots that you've actually participated in getting to hospitals all over the country. But Leslie has done an amazing job in getting those out to a number of hospitals. So thank you for that. And thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to be our guest today. I know that a lot of people that will be listening who are in an earlier season of grief, maybe in a season of grief where we are, I know they'll be encouraged and find hope in what you've shared.
Thank you so much for having me. Like I was saying before, I think there's just a greater understanding of speaking to somebody who has lost a child. And, while I would never wish that on either of us, what a remarkable experience it is to meet you, and a humbling experience on my end because I have not had to walk what you have, and how beautiful that you've changed it and made this be a resource for other families that are walking what either of us are walking.
Yeah.
I mean, so I appreciate your time and I appreciate you reaching out, and it's a wonderful thing you're doing. So I thank you for that.
Well, thank you, Leslie. And it, of course, is absolutely my privilege to be able to do that. God is so incredibly good.
I agree, 100%.
Thank you, Leslie.
Thanks a bunch.
Well, thank you for joining us today. If you would like to offer your thoughts on today's episode, simply click the link under the episode summary. And if you're interested in sharing your story on a future episode, email us using the provided link. Join us again in 2 weeks to hear another story of how God meets us in our pain, creates something beautiful from the broken pieces, and restores meaning, purpose, and hope.